This is the lecture Sinai, and Moses went up to the Lord. My doctoral advisor, Dr. Rolf Knierim, wrote a paper on Exodus 19 through 40. And when I read it, my eyes were opened as to the structure of Exodus, of what is going on once the people come to Mount Sinai. And this was very enlightening because, for the most part, Protestant commentators have tended to act as if everything important ends with chapter 24 and the making of the covenant. And then everybody loses interest and forgets about the whole building of the tabernacle. And what the structure does, as we will see, is it shows us that the story does not actually end until Exodus 40. And even there it points forward. So I would like to talk today about chapters 19 through 40 as a liturgy, as a ceremony, because in it there is a ceremony of up and down movements of Moses between God and the people, where Moses acts as the mediator. He goes up to God, he comes down to the people, goes up to God, comes down to the people, comes before God, goes to the people. And this is repeated numerous times. In 19:3 through 8a, there is the promise of a covenant. In 19:8b through 20a, there is a theophany, or appearance of God, in the thunder and the smoke and the fire and the earthquake. The giving of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, is in 19:20b through 20:21a. Then there is the giving of the covenant book and the making of a covenant in 20:21b through 24:8. There is the giving of the heavenly pattern of the tabernacle and the disruptive action of the Israelites in the making of the golden calf in 24:9 through 32:30. So we have the heavenly tabernacle being described to Moses, and when he comes down, he finds that the people have made their own gods. At this point, the sequence is disarranged until things are resolved regarding Yahweh's agreement to go forward with the people. The building of the tabernacle begins in 34:4b and finishes in 40:33. And the climax then is the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle. God comes down. In this sequence, then the covenant is important, but what it does is it creates the possibility of the tabernacle, of God's presence. And God's presence comes to the people then at the very end of the book of Exodus. The promise of covenant comes first. Then Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the Israelites, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites. So Moses first goes up to God, and then Moses comes down, and he summoned the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. The people all answered as one, "Everything that the Lord has spoken, we will do." Then Moses goes back up to God. Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, in order that the people may hear when I speak with you, and so trust you ever after." So then Moses went down from the mountain to the people. He consecrated the people, and they washed their clothes. And then we have the theophany, the smoke, the fire, the earthquake, the blast of the trumpet, the thunder. And here we have God's first coming down, in essence. He descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. The next part of the ceremony is the giving of the Decalogue. So Moses went up at God's command, and God says to Moses, "Go down and warn the people not to break through the boundaries of the permitted limits on Mount Sinai, for the people are not permitted to come up to Mount Sinai." So Moses went down to the people and told them, and it is at this point that the Decalogue, or the 10 Commandments, are given to the people. After the giving of the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was, and God proceeds to give Moses the covenant book. These are the laws, the commands that follow. At this point, Moses comes back down, and he tells the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. And all the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words that the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and set up 12 pillars corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. So again, a drawing near to God and a coming back to the people and the making of covenant. At that point, not only Moses, but Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. And under his feet there was something like a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And they have a meal with God. So again, a kind of liturgy, a ceremony. The covenant has been agreed upon, and the people come and have a meal with God, or at least their representatives. But then Moses goes further up the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day he called to Moses out of the cloud. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain, carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands, tablets that were written on both sides, written on the front and on the back. God has given Moses the plans for the tabernacle, but then he warns Moses that the people are up to mischief, and so Moses goes down the mountain. He discovers that the people have created a calf in order to worship it. And Moses goes down and he sees this. And then he returns to the Lord and says, "At last this people have sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now if you will only forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of the book that you have written." And then you have this sort of insertion, this little interlude, where it talks about Moses taking a tent, pitching it outside the camp, and everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. So the sequence is kind of disarranged. But then Moses goes back to the Lord and he says, "See, you have said to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me." So Moses going to the people is a little bit disruptive. He's going up to God multiple times. And finally he cuts 2 tablets of stone like the former ones. And he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. After all this disruption, Moses again goes up to Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tablets of stone. And it is there that God gives further commands. In a sense, God renews the covenant by giving instructions for what is to be done when the people are in the land. And then Moses comes down again from Mount Sinai, and he gives the instructions to the people. And it is at this point that the people begin the construction of the tabernacle. When all of this is finished, the climax comes as the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle. God comes down to be with the people. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. So again, the climax is not the making of covenant, but rather the covenant makes possible the presence of God among the people. When the covenant is broken by the creation of the golden calf, God again must renew the covenant. In chapter 35, the tabernacle then can be built, and it is at this point that the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle, representing God's presence among the people.